I watched a peasant girl break the English. My name is Pierre d'Orléans, and I was there, a man-at-arms who had fought for France when fighting seemed pointless, who had seen our armies shattered and our king cower in Chinon, while the goddams tightened their noose around Orléans. I am old now, my sword arm weak, my eyes dim, but I remember her as clearly as I remember my own daughter's face. They ask me still, those who come seeking stories of the Maid, was she truly sent by God? Did she perform miracles? I tell them what I saw, nothing more, nothing less, and let them make of it what they will. 7 months we had endured the siege. 7 months of watching our city slowly starve while English banners flew from the bastilles they had built around us like a chain of iron. 7 months of sallies that accomplished nothing, of eating rats and hoping for rescue that never came. And now our salvation was to be a 17-year-old shepherdess who had never seen a battle. We laughed, but it was the laughter of desperate men. I was 32 years old that spring, a veteran of Verneuil and Reverie, battles where French chivalry had been butchered by English archers. I had seen the flower of France cut down by peasants with longbows, had watched armored knights drown in mud, while common soldiers stripped them of their gold. I had no illusions left about glory or God's favor. War was mud and blood and the screaming of horses. And France was losing because the English knew how to kill efficiently while we still dreamed of tournaments. When I heard about the girl, I thought it was another scheme by the lords to rally the common folk, another lie to keep us fighting when sense said to surrender. Orléans was dying, not quickly, not with fire and sword, but slowly, like a man with a wound that will not heal. The city had been under siege since October of the previous year, 1428. The year of our Lord that brought nothing but misery. The English had built their bastilles in a ring around us, fortified positions from which they could strangle our supply lines and prevent relief. Fort Saint-Loup to the east, the Tourelle guarding the bridge to the south, the Augustins, Saint-Laurent, and more, each one a stone fist choking the life from us. We could not break out. Relief could not break in. We simply endured. I remember the hunger most clearly. Not the dramatic kind from stories, where people drop dead in the streets, but the constant gnawing emptiness that made your belly ache and your thoughts slow. Bread was rationed. Meat was a memory. We ate things we would have fed to pigs in better times. Moldy grain, wormy flour, anything that could fill the void. The wealthy still had food, of course. They always do. But for common soldiers like me, for the townspeople, each day meant choosing between fighting and eating, because there was never enough for both. The English did not assault the walls. They did not need to. They simply waited, patient as cats at a mouse hole, knowing time fought for them. Occasionally we would sally forth, try to take one of their bastilles, and each time we were driven back with losses we could not afford. I was at Reverie, the Battle of the Herrings they called it, where we attacked an English supply convoy and were routed so thoroughly that the captain stopped organizing sorties afterward. We just sat and starved and waited. Count Dunois commanded our defense, Jean, the bastard of Orléans, half-brother to the captive Duke Charles. He was a good man, a capable soldier, but even he could not conjure food from nothing, or multiply our garrison to match the English numbers. He tried, God knows he tried, but by April I could see the defeat in his eyes, the way he looked at the walls and calculated how much longer we could hold. Not long, was the answer. Not long at all. Then came word of the girl, a peasant from Domremy, who had presented herself to the Dauphin, claiming God had sent her to save France. She had convinced him, somehow, improbably, she had convinced Charles to give her armor and men and permission to march to Orléans. The news spread through the city like wildfire. Some wept with joy, seeing divine intervention. Others, like me, saw desperation in a different form. We had run out of captains and soldiers who could save us, so now we turned to a girl who heard voices. It was pathetic. I said as much to Jacques, my companion in the garrison. We had fought together since Vernier, had survived when better men died, and we shared a dark humor about the war and our chances. A maid, Jacques said, shaking his head as we stood watch on the walls. Not even a woman, mind you. A virgin. That is what will save France. I spat over the ramparts. The Dauphin has lost his mind, or the lords think we are fools enough to die bravely if they give us a saint to follow. Jacques grunted. Perhaps she is pretty. That would be something at least. We laughed, but it was hollow. We had stopped believing in miracles long ago. She arrived on the 29th of April. I was not there to see her entry. I was on duty at the northern wall, watching the English Bastille of Saint-Laurent for signs of movement. But I heard about it. Everyone heard about it. The girl had entered the city at 8 in the evening, riding a white horse, wearing armor that gleamed in the torchlight. She carried a banner, white with gold fleur-de-lis, and the people thronged around her as though she were already a saint. They touched her horse, her armor, her banner. They wept and praised God and called her their savior. The priests rang the church bells until I thought they would crack. I saw her the next day. Count Dunois had called a council of war, and all the captains and senior men-at-arms were summoned to hear her plan. I was there because my captain, La Hire, wanted experienced soldiers present who would speak truthfully about what was possible and what was madness. I expected to see a fraud, some pretty peasant girl coached by priests to mouth prophecies. Instead, I saw her. She was small. That was the first thing that struck me. In armor, on a horse, she had seemed larger, but standing in the great hall, she was just a slight girl, with a broad, plain face and dark hair, cropped short like a boy's. She should have looked ridiculous in her armor, like a child playing at war. She did not. There was something in the way she stood, in the set of her jaw and the directness of her gaze, that made you forget her size and age. She looked at the assembled captains and soldiers, hard men, scarred men, men who had killed and would kill again, and showed no fear at all. "We will break the siege," she said. Her voice was higher than I expected, but clear and firm. "God has sent me to drive the English from Orléans and see the Dauphin crowned at Reims. This is his will, and it will be done." Silence. The kind of silence that precedes either laughter or violence. La Hire broke it. "How?" he asked, not mockingly, but genuinely curious. "The English have held us 7 months. We have tried everything. What will you do that we have not?" She turned to him, and I swear I saw something flash in her eyes. Not anger, but absolute certainty. "You have fought without God," she said. "You have trusted in your own strength, your own plans. That is why you have failed. Trust in God, and we will prevail." Someone laughed. Not loudly, but enough to be heard. Joan, she had told us to call her Joan, not Jeanne or any formal title, turned toward the sound. "You doubt?" she asked. "I do not blame you. You have seen only defeat. But I tell you truly, as God is my witness, that within days the siege will be broken and the English will flee. Believe and fight, and you will see." I wanted to believe. God help me. Part of me wanted desperately to believe that this girl spoke true, that God had finally taken notice of France and sent us a champion. But I had seen too much, lost too much, to accept prophecy without proof. I glanced at Jack, standing beside me. He looked skeptical, but interested. That was something. The council debated strategy. Joan wanted to attack immediately, to strike at the English bastilles and break their hold on the city. Dunois urged caution. Our garrison was weak, our supplies low. If we sortied and failed again, the city might fall from within, even if the English never breached the walls. Joan listened to his objections, then dismissed them with a wave of her hand. "We will not fail," she said simply. "God has promised victory. We need only fight." It should have sounded like foolishness. Somehow, from her, it did not. She did something else that day, something I remember because it was so strange. She demanded that the soldiers confess their sins and purify themselves before battle. No whoring, no blasphemy, no looting. We would fight as Christian soldiers, she said, or we would not fight at all. The men grumbled. Soldiers are soldiers, and camp followers and dice are part of the life, but they obeyed. Perhaps they feared her. Perhaps they hoped she was right. Perhaps, like me, they simply had nothing left to lose. Lahia tried to argue with her about the swearing. He was a great blasphemer, was Lahia, could curse for 5 minutes without repeating himself. Joan told him it was a sin, and he must stop. He stared at her, this slip of a girl ordering a captain who had fought across France to watch his language. And then he laughed. "By my baton," he said, his favored oath. "You are right, Maid. I will try." And he did. I heard him catch himself a dozen times that week, swallowing curses and replacing them with awkward prayers. It was almost funny. The first action came on May 4th. Joan had ridden out with a supply convoy that was approaching the city from the south, escorting it past the English positions. I was part of the force that sallied from the gate to meet them, to ensure the supplies reached the city. We expected a fight. The English would not simply let provisions through, but they did nothing. They watched from their bastilles as the convoy passed, as Joan rode at its head with her banner unfurled, and they did not move. We could not understand it. Later, we learned that the English captains were confused, uncertain whether to attack the Maid or wait. Some believed she was a witch, others thought her a fraud, and they hesitated while they debated. That hesitation saved us. I saw her properly for the first time that day, riding among the soldiers as though she had been born to war. She wore a full suit of plate armor, polished bright, and carried her banner in one hand. She did not wear a helmet. She wanted the soldiers to see her face, to know she was truly there. It was madness. An arrow could have taken her easily, but no arrow came. She rode through the gates of Orléans, and the people cheered as though Christ himself had returned. That night, I stood guard on the walls and looked out at the English bastilles. Dark shapes against the darker sky. Torches burned in their camps. I could hear their voices carried on the wind, rough English words I did not understand. 7 months I had looked at those forts and felt despair. Now, for the first time, I felt something else. Not hope, exactly. Not yet, but possibility. Joan wanted to attack the very next day, but Dunois convinced her to wait, to let the men rest and prepare. She chafed at the delay. I could see the impatience in her, the burning need to act, but she agreed. She spent the time visiting the soldiers, moving among us and speaking of God's plan and our coming victory. Some men listened with reverence. Others, like me, watched and wondered. She seemed so certain, so utterly convinced that God would grant us victory. I had never met anyone like her. On the 7th of May, we marched. The target was the Bastille of Saint-Loup to the east. It was one of the smaller English forts, less heavily defended than the Tourelles or the Augustins, but still formidable. Wooden palisades, earthwork walls, a garrison of English archers and men-at-arms who had held it for months. Joan rode with us, her banner bright in the morning sun, and she was singing as we marched to battle. Hymns, prayers, songs I half remembered from childhood. Some of the men joined her. I did not. I saved my breath for the fighting to come. We attacked at midday. The English were ready. They had seen us coming, of course, but they had not expected the fury we brought. Joan rode along the line, shouting encouragement, and the men followed her with a zeal I had not seen in years. We hit the palisades like a wave against a cliff, ladders rising, men scrambling upward while arrows fell among us. I climbed with the rest, my shield over my head, and I heard men screaming as the English shot them down. But we did not waver. We did not break. We climbed. An arrow punched through my shield and grazed my shoulder, tearing cloth and skin, but missing bone. I barely felt it. All I knew was the ladder, the wall, the need to get over and into the fort. Jacques was beside me, his face twisted in a snarl of effort, and together we crested the wall and dropped into the Bastille. The English met us with swords and axes, and the fighting became a mad close-quarters brawl where there was no room for skill, only strength and will. I killed a man, a young archer, English by his accent, who swung at me with a hatchet. I caught the blow on my shield and stabbed him through the throat with my sword. He went down choking on his blood, and I stepped over him and killed another, and another. The world narrowed to the next enemy, the next strike, the next heartbeat. I did not think. I simply fought. We took the Bastille. The English broke, some fleeing toward their other forts, others surrendering. We killed most who ran and took the rest prisoner. When it was done, I stood in the center of Saint-Loup, breathing hard, my sword red to the hilt, and I looked for Joan. She was there, still on her horse, her banner held high, and she was weeping. Weeping for the English dead, for the souls lost in the fighting. It made no sense to me. We had won. Why weep? But she did, and some of the men wept with her, overcome by the violence and the victory and the strangeness of it all. That night, Orléans celebrated. Church bells rang, people danced in the streets, and for the first time in 7 months, we believed we might survive. I did not celebrate. I sat with Jacques and cleaned my armor and tried to understand what I had seen. The girl had led us to victory, yes, but was it her doing or simply our own desperation finding focus? I could not say. She was right, Jacques said, breaking the silence. What? The maid. She said we would win. We did. I shrugged. We might have won without her. Saint-Loup was not well defended. Jacques looked at me, his expression serious. You do not believe, then? You think she is a fraud? I considered. I think, I said slowly, that I do not know what she is, but I will follow her, because what else is there? And that, truly, was the heart of it. Belief or not, Joan offered something we had lacked. Hope, purpose, a reason to fight beyond mere survival. Whether that came from God or from her own conviction mattered less than the fact that it worked. The next day, Joan declared we would attack the Tourelle, the great fortified gatehouse that controlled the bridge south of Orléans. It was the strongest English position, heavily garrisoned and protected by the Bastille of the Augustins on the southern bank. Taking it would break the siege entirely, opening the road to the south and forcing the English to withdraw or be cut off. It was also near suicidal. Dunois tried to dissuade her, but Joan would not be moved. God has commanded it, she said, and so we prepared to attack the most fortified position in the region, led by a girl who had never fought before a week ago. The assault began on the morning of May 7th. I remember the taste of the air, spring turning to early summer, warm sun on cold armor, the smell of the river and the smoke from cook fires. We assembled outside the southern gate, nearly 4,000 men, a mixture of soldiers from the garrison and militia from the city. It was the largest force we had fielded since the siege began, and it was still not enough. The English held the Augustins and the Tourelles with perhaps 1,000 men, but they were veterans, well supplied, and protected by stone and earth. We would be attacking uphill, across open ground, into prepared defenses. Every military instinct I possessed said it was madness. Joan rode among us before the attack, her banner streaming in the breeze, her voice carrying across the ranks. "Fear nothing," she called. "God is with us. He has promised victory, and his promises do not fail." The men cheered. I checked my sword, my dagger, my shield. Jacques crossed himself and muttered a prayer. La Hire, commanding our vanguard, grinned like a wolf and raised his baton. "For France!" he roared. "For the Maid!" The cry was taken up by hundreds of throats, and then we were moving, marching south across the bridge of boats that connected the city to the fortified island where the Augustins stood. The English saw us coming. Of course they did. We were not subtle. Arrows began to fall before we were halfway across. Long shafts launched from the walls of the Augustins, and men fell screaming into the Loire. I raised my shield and kept moving, the weight of armor and weapons dragging at me, and I heard Joan's voice still calling encouragement, though I could no longer see her through the press of bodies. The bridge seemed to stretch forever, each step bringing more arrows, more screams, more dying men tumbling into the water. Then we were across, onto the island, and the real fighting began. We hit the walls of the Augustins like a ram hitting a gate. Ladders went up, men climbed, and the English met us with everything they had: arrows, rocks, boiling water, swords and axes for those who reached the top. I was in the second wave, scrambling up a ladder, while the man above me took an arrow through the eye and fell backward, knocking me down. I hit the ground hard, the breath driven from my lungs, and lay there gasping while men trampled around me. Jacques hauled me up, shouting something I could not hear over the roar of battle, and shoved me toward another ladder. I climbed. At the top, an English soldier waited with a spear. He thrust at me, and I caught the point on my shield, the impact jarring my arm, and swung my sword at his legs. He jumped back, and I rolled over the wall, landing in a crouch inside the Bastille. More English came at me, and I fought with the desperate strength of a man who knows hesitation means death. Slash, parry, shield bash, stab, over and over until my arm burned, and my lungs ached, and the world was nothing but blood and steel and screaming. We took the Augustines. It cost us. God, how it cost us. Dozens dead, more wounded, but we took it. The English retreated to the Tourelle, the great stone fortress that loomed across the narrow gap between the island and the southern bank. They burned the wooden bridge that connected the two positions, cutting themselves off, but also preventing us from following immediately. We had won the first battle, but the real prize still lay ahead. Joan was everywhere. I saw her on the walls of the Augustines, her armor dented and her banner scorched but still flying, and she was shouting orders, rallying men, directing the next phase of the attack. She had not fought. She carried no weapon beyond a sword she refused to use, but she had been in the thick of it nonetheless, inspiring by her presence alone. Some of the men claimed they had seen her banner glow with holy light during the assault. I had seen no such thing, only a girl who refused to show fear while men died around her. Night fell. We held the Augustins, but the Tourelles remained in English hands, and without a way across the gap, we could not press the attack. Dunois wanted to wait, to rebuild the bridge or bring up boats, but Joan insisted we continue the next morning. "We will take it tomorrow," she said, as though speaking of a certainty rather than a hope. "God has shown me. Tomorrow, the siege is broken." I wanted to ask what God had shown her, what visions she saw that gave her such confidence, but I kept silent. I was too tired for questions, too tired for anything but sleep and food and the brief respite of not fighting. We slept on the island that night, surrounded by the dead. The English in the Tourelles were so close we could hear them talking, could see their torches burning on the walls. They knew we were coming. They would be ready. I lay on the hard ground, my body aching from the day's fighting, and I thought about the morning, about climbing those walls again, about the arrows and the blood, and the slim chance we might actually prevail. I thought about Joan, sleeping somewhere nearby, and I wondered if she truly heard God's voice, or if she simply believed so strongly that belief became its own kind of truth. Morning came grey and cold. The 8th of May, the feast day of some saint whose name I have forgotten. We assembled before dawn, ate a meager breakfast of stale bread and weak wine, and prepared for the assault. Joan was already awake, already armored, already praying. She saw me watching and smiled, a strange, gentle expression that seemed out of place on a battlefield. "Do not fear, Pierre," she said. I startled. I had not realized she knew my name. "We will prevail. I have seen it." "Seen it how?" I asked before I could stop myself. "In your visions?" She nodded. "God shows me what must be, and gives me strength to do his will. You will see. Before the sun sets, the English will flee, and Orléans will be free." I wanted to believe her, but belief is not a thing you can summon by will alone. The attack on the Tourelles was the hardest fighting I have ever known, and I have fought in a dozen battles across France. We bridged the gap with a barge brought from the city, a makeshift and unstable platform that rocked under the weight of armored men. The English poured arrows onto us from the walls, and the river below ran red with the blood of those who fell. I crossed that bridge, if you can call it that, with my shield locked above my head and my teeth gritted against the fear, and I heard men praying, cursing, screaming as they were hit. The English were not just defending. They were killing us with professional efficiency. archers working in relays so the arrows never stopped. And I understood then that we were going to fail. There were too many of them, too few of us, and the walls were too high. Then Joan crossed the bridge. I saw her coming, her white banner bright against the grey sky, and she was shouting something, words I could not make out, but that carried over the din of battle. She reached the base of the tourelle and planted her banner in the ground, and the men surged forward with renewed fury. I do not know what they saw in her, sainthood perhaps, or simply the recklessness of youth, but they followed her, and I followed them, because what else was there to do? I climbed a ladder propped against the wall of the tourelle, my arms burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. An arrow struck my shield and punched through, the point stopping inches from my face. Another hit my shoulder plate and glanced off with a screech of metal. I kept climbing. At the top, an English man-at-arms grabbed the ladder and tried to push it away from the wall. I threw my weight forward, pinning the ladder in place, and Jacques, behind me on the same ladder, stabbed upward with his spear, catching the Englishman in the gut. The man fell back screaming, and I hauled myself over the wall into hell. The fighting on the walls was chaos. No formations, no tactics, just men killing each other in the narrow space between the battlements and the drop to the courtyard below. I fought beside men whose names I did not know, against enemies who were trying just as desperately to survive. My sword broke. The blade snapped halfway down during a parry, and I drew my dagger and fought with that, stabbing and slashing at anything in English colors. My world shrank to heartbeats, to breaths, to the next man trying to kill me, and my attempt to kill him first. Joan was hit. I did not see it happen, but I heard the cry that went up. The Maid is down. The Maid is wounded. And for a moment, the fighting faltered. Both sides paused, French in horror, English in hope, and I looked down from the wall to see her lying on the ground near her banner, an arrow jutting from between her neck and shoulder. Blood soaked her armor. She was not moving. The English cheered. They thought her dead, thought God had abandoned her and us. They pressed forward with renewed strength, and we fell back step by step, losing the ground we had won. I thought it was over. I thought we would be driven from the walls, that the assault would fail, and Joan would die, and Orléans would starve until we surrendered. I thought God had been silent after all. Then she stood. I saw it with my own eyes. Joan of Arc, with an arrow through her shoulder, staggered to her feet and pulled the shaft from her own flesh. Blood poured from the wound, but she did not fall. She gripped her banner with her good hand and raised it high, and she screamed, a sound of pain and fury and absolute defiance. "Fight!" she cried. "In God's name, fight! We will not yield!" And we did not yield. I cannot explain what happened next. Something broke in the English, some certainty that they would win, and we felt it and pushed forward. Men who had been ready to flee instead turned and fought with a ferocity I had never seen. We drove the English back across the walls, back toward the gatehouse, back into the tower itself. They fought every step, but they were losing and they knew it. I saw their faces, not monsters, just men, and I saw the fear in their eyes as they realized they would die here. The English commander, a man named Glasdale, tried to retreat across a makeshift bridge to the southern bank. The bridge collapsed under the weight of his armor, and he fell into the Loire. I watched him sink, watched the water close over his head, and he did not rise. Other English threw down their weapons and surrendered. Some fled into the tower and barricaded themselves, but it was over. The tourelle had fallen. Joan stood in the courtyard, blood still running from her wound, her banner torn and scorched, but still flying. She looked at the surrendered English, at the bodies piled in the courtyard and floating in the river, and she wept again. "So many dead," she said. "So many souls lost. Pray for them. Pray for all of them." I could not pray. I could barely stand. I sat on the stones, my borrowed sword across my knees, and I stared at nothing while the world slowly came back into focus. We had won. Against all odds, against all sense, we had won. The tourelle was ours. The bridge was ours. The siege was broken. That night, the English withdrew from their remaining bastilles around Orléans. We watched from the walls as they abandoned Saint-Laurent, Saint-Pierre, and the others, torching what they could not carry and marching away into the darkness. 7 months they had besieged us, and in 4 days, Joan had driven them away. The city erupted in celebration, bells ringing, people singing, bonfires in the streets. They called it a miracle. They called her a saint. I sat with Jacques on the wall and watched the fires burning in the abandoned English camps. My shoulder ached where the arrow had grazed it during the assault on Saint-Loup. Joan's wound, far worse than mine, had already been bandaged, and she had refused to rest, insisting on visiting the wounded and dying to offer them comfort. I could not understand her. I could not understand any of it. "Do you believe now?" Jacques asked. I did not answer immediately. I thought about Joan pulling the arrow from her own flesh. I thought about the way the men had fought after she fell, as though her rising had given them strength beyond the natural. I thought about the English retreat, the surrender, the impossible victory. "I believe," I said at last, "that something happened here that I cannot explain. Whether it was God or the girl's own will or simple luck, I do not know. But I believe something." Jacques nodded. "That is more than you believed 4 days ago." It was. 4 days ago, I had been ready to die in a doomed city, waiting for the end. Now I sat on the wall of a free city, watching our enemies retreat, and I did not know what to think, what to feel, what to believe. I knew only that Joan had done what she promised. The siege was broken, Orléans was saved, and France, perhaps, had been given a chance it did not deserve. The city celebrated for 3 days. Masses were held in every church, and Joan attended all of them, kneeling in prayer while the people pressed close to touch her armor, her banner, even her horse. They called her the Maid of Orléans, the savior sent by God, and she accepted their adoration with a humility that seemed genuine. She did not boast. She did not claim credit. She said only that God had delivered the city, and that we must give thanks to him. Some believed her. Others, like me, watched and wondered. I saw her on the 3rd day after the victory, standing in the cathedral of Sainte-Croix, while the bishop blessed her banner. The wound in her shoulder had been stitched and bound, but she moved stiffly, the pain evident despite her efforts to hide it. She caught me watching and beckoned me over. I approached reluctantly, unsure what to say to this strange girl who had upended everything I thought I understood about war and God and the world. "You fought well, Pierre," she said. Her voice was gentle, almost kind. "I saw you on the walls of the Tourelle. You did not falter." "I did what any soldier would do," I replied, uncomfortable with the praise. "I fought to survive." She smiled. "That is honest. I value honesty. Tell me, do you believe God sent me?" The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, and she waited patiently for my answer. "I believe," I said slowly, "that you broke the siege. Whether God sent you, or you simply believed strongly enough to make us believe, I cannot say. But you did what you said you would do. That is enough for me." She nodded, as though my doubt did not offend her. "Belief will come in time, or it will not. I do not ask you to believe in me, only to fight for France. Will you do that?" "I am a soldier," I said. "I go where I am ordered." "Then I ask that you come with me to Reims, to see the Dauphin crowned. The English are not defeated, only driven back. There is more work to do." I agreed, though I did not know then what that work would cost. The army marched from Orléans in June, heading north and east toward Reims, where French kings were traditionally crowned. Joan rode at the head of the column, her banner bright in the summer sun, and the men followed her with a zeal that bordered on fanaticism. They believed she was invincible, blessed by God, and they would follow her anywhere. I marched with them, still uncertain, still skeptical, but unwilling to abandon the only cause that seemed to offer hope. We fought at Jargeau, at Meung-sur-Loire, at Beaugency, and at Patay. Each battle was a victory. The English, who had seemed unstoppable, broke before us like waves against stone. At Patay, we caught their army in open field and slaughtered them. Hundreds dead, thousands fleeing, their commanders captured or killed. It was the kind of victory France had not seen in a generation, and Joan was at the center of it, her banner flying, her voice calling us forward. I killed men at Patay, good men, probably, with families and homes and reasons to fight. I killed them because they were English and we were French and the war demanded it. I felt nothing. After Orléans, after the Tourelle, killing had become something I did without thought, a reflex born of survival and duty. Joan wept for the English dead at Patay, as she had at every battle. I did not. We reached Reims in July. The city opened its gates without a fight, and on the 17th of that month, Charles was crowned King of France in the great cathedral. Joan stood beside him during the ceremony, her banner in her hands, and the people cheered until the walls shook. I watched from the back of the cathedral, surrounded by soldiers and nobles and commoners who had come to witness history, and I felt nothing. No joy, no pride, no sense of triumph, only exhaustion. Only the knowledge that the war was not over, that the English still held Paris and Normandy and half of France, and that we would keep fighting until we were all dead or too old to lift a sword. Joan wanted to press on to Paris, to drive the English from the capital and complete the reconquest. But Charles hesitated. He had his crown, his legitimacy, and he feared risking everything on another campaign. The nobles whispered in his ear, urging caution, urging negotiation, and Joan's influence began to wane. She raged against the delay, but she was a soldier, not a politician, and she did not understand the games being played around her. I spoke with her once during those frustrating weeks, as the army sat idle outside Reims. She was cleaning her armor, a task she insisted on doing herself, and I sat nearby sharpening my sword. "They will betray you," I said bluntly. "The king, the nobles, they used you to win Orléans and crown Charles, but they do not want you to become too powerful. They will sideline you, and then they will discard you." She looked at me, her expression sad but unsurprised. "I know," she said. "God has shown me not the details, but the shape of it. I will not see France fully freed. That is for others." "Then why continue?" I asked. "Why not retire, take the honors they offer, and live?" She smiled, and it was the saddest smile I have ever seen. "Because God commands it," she said simply, "and because if I do not fight, who will?" I had no answer to that. The campaign for Paris failed. We assaulted the walls in September, and Joan was wounded again, an arrow through the thigh that laid her low for weeks. The attack was called off, and the army withdrew. Charles made peace with the Duke of Burgundy, a fragile truce that accomplished nothing, and Joan was left with a small force to continue the fight in the north. I was with her when she was captured at Compiègne in May of 1430, taken by Burgundian soldiers who sold her to the English. I tried to reach her, fought my way through the press of enemies, but there were too many and I was driven back. I saw them drag her away, saw her struggling and shouting, and then she was gone. The English burned her at Rouen on the 30th of May, 1431. I was not there. I heard about it later, second-hand reports from men who had been in the city. They said she recanted her visions, then recanted her recantation. They said she died calling on Jesus, that she asked for a cross and held it until the flames took her. They said the executioner wept afterward, claiming he had burned a saint. I do not know what is true and what is embellishment. I know only that she died and France did not. I am an old man now, more than 40 years removed from the siege of Orléans. I have fought in a dozen more battles, served under captains whose names have been forgotten, and watched France slowly, painfully, drive the English from our lands. The war ended in 1453, more than 2 decades after Joan died, and we won. Not because of miracles, but because we learned to fight the way she taught us, with conviction, with faith in our cause, with the belief that France was worth dying for. That, perhaps, was her true miracle. Not the visions, not the voices, but the belief she inspired in others. They made her a saint eventually. rehabilitated her, held a trial that declared the first trial false, proclaimed her innocent and holy and martyred. The church needed a symbol, and Joan, conveniently dead and unable to complicate matters, fit perfectly. I attended the ceremony in Paris when they announced it, an old soldier in a crowd of nobles and priests who had not been there, who had not fought beside her, who saw only the legend and not the girl. I wanted to shout at them, to tell them that Joan had been human, fallible, frightened at times despite her courage. But I said nothing. Let them have their saint. The truth was more complicated and less comforting. Did God speak to Joan? I have been asked that question 1,000 times by priests and scholars and common folk who want to understand. I tell them what I know. I saw a girl who believed absolutely that God had sent her to save France. I saw her do impossible things, break a siege that had seemed unbreakable, inspire men to fight when they had given up, win battles against overwhelming odds. I saw her wounded and weeping and defiant. I saw her burned by the same people she had fought to save. Whether God spoke to her, I cannot say. I am a soldier, not a theologian, but I believe this. Joan spoke, and France listened, and we were saved. If that is not divine, then it is something so close as to make no difference. I think of her often, especially as my own death approaches. I am 74 years old, too old for war, too old for much of anything except memory. My hands shake when I hold a cup. My eyes fail in dim light. But I remember Joan as clearly as I remember my own children, her plain face and her bright banner and her absolute, unshakable conviction that she was doing God's will. I remember standing on the walls of Orléans and watching the English retreat, and I remember thinking that perhaps, just perhaps, the world was not as dark as I had believed. They asked me what she was like, this girl who changed the course of a war. I tell them she was small and stubborn and brave beyond measure. I tell them she wept for the dead, even the enemy dead, and that she refused to kill even when surrounded by killing. I tell them she was kind to those who doubted her and fierce toward those who opposed her. I tell them she was human, gloriously and frustratingly human, and that made her more remarkable than any saint could be. The siege of Orléans was broken in 8 days, from the first assault on Saint-Loup to the fall of the Tourelles. 8 days that changed everything. Before Joan, we were a defeated nation waiting for the end. After Joan, we were a nation that remembered how to fight. She gave us that, not through miracles, though some call them that, but through belief. She believed God had sent her. She believed France could be saved, and she made us believe it too. I do not know if I will see her again in the next life. I do not know if there is a next life, or if God exists, or if Joan's voices were divine, or madness, or something in between. I know only what I saw. A girl who should have died a dozen times, and did not, who led soldiers who should have broken, and did not, who changed the course of a war that should have been lost, and was not. That is enough. It has to be enough. The sun sets earlier now than it did when I was young, or perhaps I simply notice it more. I sit by the window of my daughter's house in Orléans, the city I helped save, the city that still celebrates Joan every May, and I watch the light fade over the river. Somewhere out there, the English Bastilles once stood. Somewhere out there, men died so that others might live. Somewhere out there, a girl heard voices and believed them and saved us all. I was there. I fought beside her. I doubted her and followed her and watched her die in fire and smoke and the cruelty of men who feared what they could not control. I am the last, I think. The last of those who stood on the walls of the Tourelles and watched Joan pull an arrow from her own flesh and rise to fight again. Soon I will join her, and Jacques, and La Haye, and all the others who fell in that long, terrible war. But not yet. Not quite yet. There is one more thing I must say, one more truth I must speak before I die. Joan of Arc was real. Not the legend, not the saint, but the girl, stubborn and fierce and afraid and brave and human. She was real, and she was there, and I saw her. Whatever else history claims, whatever the church declares, whatever the scholars decide in their safe halls far from battle, I know this. I saw her stand when she should have fallen. I saw her lead when she should have fled. I saw her believe when belief seemed madness. And I saw France saved. My name is Pierre d'Orléans, and I was there when the siege was broken. I have lived a long life, fought in a dozen battles, buried friends and enemies, and watched the world change in ways I never imagined. But nothing compares to those 8 days in May when a girl with a banner and a belief made the impossible real. They say she heard voices. Perhaps she did. Perhaps God spoke to her in ways he did not speak to others. Or perhaps she simply believed so strongly, so absolutely, that belief became its own kind of truth. I do not know. I know only that I followed her, that I fought beside her, that I watched her change the world. And when I close my eyes, I see her still, standing in the courtyard of the Tourelle, blood on her armor and her banner held high, weeping for the dead and calling us to fight. She was 17 years old. She saved France, and I was there. The girl is gone. The ashes are scattered. Only the saint remains in gold and glass. But I remember the beating heart beneath the armor. Rest now, Joan. The history remains.